Peace is a garden to be tended, but the jungle is the norm. Did you hear that? Peace is a garden to be tended, but the jungle is a norm. That idea has been popping up in the things I read online for weeks now, and I do not entirely know what I think of it. Now, of course, most of those articles where that pops up have been about Israel and Hamas and the Palestinians, and taking into account Ukraine and Russia as well. And you can see what they're trying to say, right? It's actually paraphrasing an idea that came from an author named Robert Kagan, and I'll admit I have not read the book that it comes from. So don't hear me any deeper than the line itself, but what do you think of it? Peace is a garden to be tended, but the jungle is the norm. Now, at the very least, there is some truth in the metaphor. So I've said before, I've made no secret of it, that my thumb is not green. I can't grow anything. It's just not my talent and not in my skill set. And that's okay. I've come to peace with it. But I'll tell you, every house I've ever lived in, when we've moved in, has had nice garden plots in front of them. And you know, that first spring, there's a few flowers that pop up. I don't know how. I didn't do anything to help that, but they're left over from the past, right? And then as I've lived there, after a period of time, after years of, I'll be honest, neglect, those garden plots start to be less colorful. And in fact, the things that grow in them start to be less good, even to the point of trees trying to pop up that endanger the house's foundation and have to be dealt with. This is what's happened at every house I've lived in. So I do know that gardens need to be tended because the jungle is the norm. And we see it other places too, right? There's this construction going on just across Kentwell. I usually park along the street over there on the weekdays. And for a while, before they started the main part of the construction, they put in the basement walls, but not the foundation. And then it sat for about a year, I'd say it was. And as it did, you could see all sorts of plants trying to grow up in the walls of this new house. Nature was trying to reclaim these basements. And my own joke was that we had our very own sunken gardens right here on Kentwell. Our very own sunken village gardens, right? Now, of course, they came and the construction's ongoing now. But have you ever seen an old building like a barn that's been abandoned on a piece of farmland that's not being used? Well, nature does reclaim, right? The plants and the trees start growing in its midst. It starts to fall apart. There's a farmhouse it looks to be an old schoolhouse. Whenever I go to visit my parents, I go by it. And over the years, I've seen it look more and more, well, nature's taking over. It's taking back that area, right? Sometimes there are even urban areas where this happens, and you see that even concrete is no match for a growing tree. So there is at least truth in the metaphor that peace is a garden to be tended, but the jungle is the norm. And peace is like that, isn't it? Relationships take work. If you neglect a marriage, weeds begin to grow. At first things are fine, but if you don't keep up the bond between two married people, it begins to weaken. It begins to fall apart. And the same happens with friendships, especially if you live a distance away from an old friend. There may be something of that bond that remains forever, but not in the same way unless you put in the effort to tend that garden. We see it with nations, of course. That's why this quote keeps popping up, at least for me, between Russia and Ukraine, between Israel and Hamas. And so if you neglect your relationships, well, the jungle grows back. And that's this quote: peace is a garden to be tended, but the jungle is the norm. But there's something that leaves me uneasy about that phrase. There's something that strikes me as incomplete. Something's missing. So right now, here at Trinity, we are reading through the Old Testament, or not exactly. There's not enough Sundays in the fall season to read all of the Old Testament, of course, but we're at least hitting some of the major moments and the major stories so that we can better appreciate the Hebrew Bible, as it's better called. And today, we get to one of those key moments in the history of God's people in the Hebrew Bible. Unfortunately, there's no one passage that says it succinctly. So I thank Bill so much for reading the scripture a few minutes ago, but if you couldn't quite put together what was going on, you're most definitely forgiven, because like I say, there is no one place that says it succinctly. Yet, it's such a key moment. Let me give you just a little bit of history. So, King David ruled for a great time. It was a time of prosperity. There was a temple. People worshiped in the temple. He was a great king that united all of the Israelites. It was definitely a high period. But even in the midst of that, there was an old argument that remained, and it was something of an urban and rural divide, in that some people thought that it was only valid to worship God in the temple. And so there would be pilgrimages of people traveling to Jerusalem to worship at the temple and then go back to their homes in the rural areas. There were others that said, this is silly. We can worship God wherever we want. And so they would worship, so they would do so. And this tension between the urban and the rural was always there, even as David kept things united. Now, just a little side note, isn't it interesting that that's one of those tensions that arises in every society between urban and rural? As Ecclesiastes would say, there's nothing new under the sun, is there? It's also a tension between how to worship, another thing that tends to divide even our present era. Well, anyway, we get to today's story, and what we have is King David has been gone long enough that the weeds have been growing up higher and higher, that the tensions are becoming more and more. And if you want to read just a little wider from what we read today, what's happened is King Rehoboam, who is of the part of Israel where Jerusalem is, so right, worshiping in the temple, trying to follow in the line of King David and in that tradition, trying to keep it up. King Rehoboam is new, and the people come to him and say, you know what, we will be your servants, we will follow you as king, but your father made things very difficult for us. If you promise to be a little bit easier, we'll follow you. And so the new King Rehoboam went to the wise old advisors of his father, and they said, well, you should do it. You should go a little bit easier on them. If you show them some kindness and grace, now they'll follow you for life. Then he went to his younger advisors, more of his friends, and they said the opposite. They said, wait a second, what the people need is to be led with a strong hand. What you need to do is crack the whip, literally. And so Rehoboam did not choose the path of wisdom, and he went back to the people and said that he was going to be harsher on them, not easier. And what they said in response was the passage that we read a few minutes ago, and I'll read it to you again. When all Israel saw that the king wouldn't listen to them, the people answered the king, why should we care about David? Like carrying on in the tradition of David, right? We have no stake in Jesse's son. Go back to your homes, Israel. You better look after your own house now, David. And so, just like that, in a way so simple, the people that lived in the more rural areas of Jerusalem stopped following the king. You know, you never see any Hollywood movies of this because it's not exactly the most dramatic story in all of history, is it? In fact, it was simple. It was more of a straw that broke the camel's back after years of neglect and the weeds growing in the midst of it. The people tried to reach out to the new king, but the new king would not listen to reason, would not listen to wisdom. And so they drifted further apart, and it was a kingdom divided. In the time that followed, the people who lived in the more rural areas in the northern kingdom, as it came to be called, did end up worshiping God wherever they pleased. They did set up places to worship elsewhere, and so things were firmly divided between the northern kingdom, which kept the name of Israel, and the southern kingdom, which took on the name of Judah, from which the modern-day Jews are descended. Peace is a garden to be tended, but the jungle is the norm. Now, at first glance, this seems to hold true, does it not? But one of the dangers of reading the Bible, or anything for that matter, is to read it out of context, to take out one story without looking at the grand sweep of things around it, to consider one tree and miss the forest in the process. Because the bigger story is that this is not the first time God's people have ever been divided. In fact, time and time again, they have struggled, and time again, God has been there with them to redeem him, just as God is in this case. You know, if you've been coming a lot this fall, then you know that we read the story of where the name Israel comes from. It came from Jacob wrestling with God, God dislocating his hip, him walking away with a limp and a new name. And that new name was Struggles with God, which is the translation of Israel. Yet God was still with him. This is not just a story of struggle, but it's a story of struggle both in its own self, but how God was also there to redeem that struggle. You know, if you want to talk theology, what we're really talking about here is one of those ideas that's difficult to our modern ears, that's difficult for us to wrestle with. So don't get turned off when I say it. Original sin. Now, when I say original sin, it's not about shame. It's not about punishment. What it really means is that God is perfect and we're not. So anybody here ever made a mistake? You don't actually have to raise your hands. I'm not going to turn around and look at the choir either. Anthem was great, by the way. No mistakes in it. But I'm just assuming elsewhere, right? How about this one? Anybody here marry a perfect spouse? Well, I mean, I did. Oh, wow, it's all men who raise their hands. Woo! I'm not going there, not with a 10-foot pole. How about this one? Ever look out at the world and see even a single individual who has their life 100% together? Sometimes we think we do. Maybe somebody in the public eye seems to have it all together. But there's always something. There's always something. And if we could see deeper, we know that they have struggled with God too. You see, what original sin is really about is that to err is human. It is in our nature to need grace. You hear that? It is in our nature to need help. But just like we can't consider this story of the ancient Israelites apart from the bigger story of the wrestling with God and of the struggle and of God's redemption, just like we can't consider that alone, neither can we consider our own weakness without the bigger story of God's redemption for us. Now that, of course, is part of the same story, but it culminates in Jesus. Jesus coming to show us and to teach us and to help us, to reveal to us God's heart in an even deeper way, to enter into the deepest suffering that humanity can conjure up, to show that God is with us even in our biggest mistakes. And then, even more than that, in the empty tomb, the risen Christ to return, a promise to always be with us no matter what, to show us that there is nothing that we can mess up that God cannot redeem. So in the short term, we do, admittedly, need to do better tending our gardens, so to speak. Human weakness is on display in so many areas. In the Middle East, in Eastern Europe, in our politics here at home, in our own lives. Human weakness is on display. But let us not forget that we are apprentices of a master gardener. Let us not forget that while we do have work to do, while we must do that work to tend our garden and the gardens of this world, let us not forget that it is God who is the master gardener, that it is God who has always walked with us, who has always redeemed us. You see, the problem with saying the jungle is the norm is that while it's very true for what humans can do, it's not accounting for what God can do, the God who is making all things new. But usually, the way God does it is through you and me. Through ordinary, imperfect people, we become the tools of the master gardener. And that means we have work to do. And so, when we look out at the imperfect world, when we look inward at our own imperfect hearts, don't forget your hoe. Don't forget your rake. Don't forget your kneeling pad. And let's be honest, we're going to need some Band-Aids. Maintain your friendships with presence and with grace. Spend time with those you love, because time with them is a gift. Use whatever influence you have, and we all have more influence than we think we have. Use whatever influence you have to promote peace in our community and in our world. And when you slip, and you will, look for God's grace, because it will be there. We have some hard work to do to tend the garden of peace, and we neglect it at our peril because the jungle will grow back. But in the same breath, don't forget that the master gardener is there too. Let us pray. Oh God, we give you thanks that you have redeemed us so many times. And we ask your forgiveness for the many ways that we've fallen short. We need your grace. We need your help. We say it individually, and we say it as a community. Oh God, do not abandon us, but help us to trust in your promise that you are making all things new. May we count on it. We pray it in Jesus' perfect name. Amen.